This is Generations. My name is Kevin Swanson, and Martin Luther King Jr. Day was last week, and it's almost over. The national holiday is almost over. Now, why is that? Well, the tape. It's about to be released in 2027. That's next year. So let's change it to George Washington Carver Day, or change it to St. Augustine Day, or Bodie Baucham Day, or something. But maybe we should stop dedicating national holidays to humans. European nations celebrate St. Patrick's Day, St. Andrew's Day, St. Olaf's Day, and other nations commemorate Simon Bolivar, Nelson Mandela, Khomeini, Gandhi. They give them national holidays. Now, Martin Luther King Jr. insisted that a man be judged by the content of the character, not by the color of skin. And Martin Luther King Jr. turned into a martyr of sorts, a martyr and an icon. But his biographers, they've got a number of Pulitzer Prizes. Taylor Branch, America in the King Years, admits to the man's many sexual affairs. David Garrow is the winner of a Pulitzer Prize-winning King biography. He's also a liberal, pro-King guy, but he's a journalist, he's honest, and he's admitted to the, 36-plus affairs for the man. David Garrow tried to publish his piece in 2019, but all the U.S. outlets rejected his article. Only a British magazine was willing to publish the article, Standpoint Magazine. Peter J. Ling, author of Martin Luther King Jr., acknowledged incredible evidence that King engaged in affairs. Marshall Frady, also author of Martin Luther King Jr., A Life, wrote openly about King's sexual relationships outside of marriage. Then Ralph Abernathy addressed the issue plainly in his 1989 memoir, The Walls Came Tumbling Down. Abernathy clearly stated that King engaged in multiple extramarital relationships. He presented this as a well-known fact within King's inner circle. Highly significant because Abernathy was King's closest friend, his longest-serving lieutenant, loyal to the end, and a successor as head of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, whatever that was. So there were more than 2 to 3 witnesses to anywhere between 36 and 46 extramarital affairs going on for Martin Luther King Jr. Yes, he was a Marx sympathizer. In his 1952 letter to then girlfriend Coretta Scott King, MLK wrote in discussing Edward Bellamy's seminal socialist novel, Looking Backward, that, quote, I imagine you already know that I'm much more socialistic in my economic theory than capitalistic, and economically speaking, he considered himself what he termed a Marxist largely because he believed with increasing strength that American society needed a radical redistribution of wealth and economic power to achieve even a rough form of social justice. And these are MLK's words. He said, I read Marx as I read all the influential historical thinkers from a dialectical point of view, combining a partial yes and a partial no, insofar as Marx posited a metaphysical materialism, an ethical relativism, and a strangulating totalitarianism. I responded with an unambiguous no. But insofar as he pointed out weaknesses of traditional capitalism, contributed to the growth of a definite self-consciousness in the masses, and challenged the social conscience of the Christian church, I responded with a definite yes. But that's not the issue. A man is to be judged by the content of his character, not by the color of his skin or necessarily by the random opinions of a wayward mind. The man's drunkenness, his adulteries, the man's out-of-control character issues, a well-known and established fact by now. The truth has a way of coming out. The color of the skin of the person speaking of these things doesn't matter. The truth is what matters, and whether that be Ralph Abernathy or David Garrow sharing the truth of it. And keep in mind the tape will be released by court order in 2027. The incriminating tape. Yes, the tape. The winds of public opinions have shifted direction since 1968. Now, stay with me here. Let me explain by one market example. Take Prince Andrew of England, for example. He is the pariah of the court, the offscouring of British society, the goat of a modern human society, the meat for the grinder. But that was not the way things were in 1968. The behavior that makes Prince Andrew a pariah today would have been far less likely to result in open ostracism in 1968, especially for someone of royal rank. Private sexual misconduct or even serious exploitative behavior was far more likely to be hidden, managed, or quietly suppressed in elite circles in the 1960s than publicly condemned. Reputation was protected through discretion, silence, and institutional shielding. The press largely practiced deference towards the monarchy. Victims, especially young women, had little cultural or legal leverage then. Even when scandals were known privately, they rarely translated into public disgrace. In 1968, age of consent laws existed, but enforcement against elites was rare. Social pressure discouraged reporting. Cross-class accusations were often dismissed outright. A young woman accusing a prince would likely face disbelief, reputational ruin, and no meaningful legal pathway. This reality prevented public scandal from forming. That's back in 1968. But now, this doesn't apply directly to MLK Jr., but let's talk about rape. Rape is far more stigmatized today than in 1968. Adultery is more complicated. Overall, sexual violence now carries vastly greater social condemnation, while adultery has become less uniformly stigmatized in private life, but more consequential in public or institutional roles. So, today, rape is widely understood as violent crime and abuse of power. Victim testimony is taken seriously. Though imperfectly, institutions face reputational damage if they attempt any cover-up. Accusations alone can cause social and professional exile. Rape is among the most socially condemned acts, especially when power asymmetries are involved with this. So, folks, it's over for Martin Luther King Jr. The tape will be released next year, 2027, 63 years after the fact. MLK Jr. days are over. And MLK Jr. Day is over in the United States. The shine is fading fast. Back in 2011, 93% of Americans were big on MLK Jr. Today, only 66% of Americans are in favor of MLK Jr. Day on the YouGov survey. So here's my point. No Christian should pay any attention to Martin Luther King Jr. Day. The Bible speaks to this. He who justifies the wicked and he who condemns the just, both of them are alike an abomination to the Lord. But what shall we say? We repudiate the segregation standards that came by that liberal socialist New World Order Christian apostate President Woodrow Wilson. Remember, it was Wilson's administration that allowed and often encouraged cabinet departments to segregate employees by race, even where black and white workers had previously worked side by side. Woodrow Wilson's practices encouraged, endorsed, and pressed upon the federal workplaces included separate workrooms, desks, cafeterias, restrooms, water fountains, et cetera, physical screens, partitions to block contact. Woodrow Wilson was arguably the most wicked president in American history, so we repudiate him. We repudiate the stupid controls placed on privately held railroad lines and private businesses to segregate the whites and the blacks, and we repudiate all the stupid businesses that wouldn't hire people of slightly different skin color, although they would be quite competent to the job. And we repudiate governments forcing businesses to hire those people or these people because of the color of their skin versus the content of their character and the competence of their work. Okay, but why should we celebrate a cultural icon who does not reflect any of that content of character at the most fundamental level, only because he represents a certain color of skin? Well, another reason why my family has celebrated George Washington Carver Day through the years, we love GWC. And so let's talk about George Washington Carver and some of our real heroes in history with Bill Jack from Worldview Academy. Welcome, Bill. And Bill, we appreciate the fact that there are men and women of every tribe and nation around the world who have contributed greatly to the kingdom of God for the cause of righteousness. There are heroes. There are great heroes in history. And I want to talk about some of them in just a moment. But before I go there, shall we really dedicate a federal holiday to a particular person? I think that's the question we want to grapple with. We got President's Day on the one hand. In that case, we're reverencing, honoring the contributions of multiple presidents, thankfully not Woodrow Wilson. But, George Washington.
Abraham Lincoln.
You think about Teddy Roosevelt, perhaps, and Calvin Coolidge. Okay, I'll pick some of my favorites. John Quincy Adams. There's been some good presidents along the way, and we appreciate that. But when you do a national holiday like our national holiday for independence, we're recognizing not just a single person, but a group of people, and I think there's some safety in that. So I'll just say that I think it's much safer to acknowledge the contributions of multiple persons with a national holiday than it would be to say, let's do the Woodrow Wilson Day.
Well, I think you may have a point there, and the issue is there are people who contributed to the cause of liberty who did not have good character. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking we can take it out of our history and we can take a look at, say, Mahatma Gandhi, who is, revered, but he too had his sexual dalliances. Mm-hmm. He was the one to whom that Martin Luther King Jr. modeled his campaign after, mm-hmm. And so I'm not broad brushing those two, but I'm just saying that there are people who have contributed to the cause of liberty, but I would not admire them because of their lack of character. Mm-hmm. And so there are people who have character, but we don't remember them. There are people who don't have character but have accomplished great feats.
In American history, you might be able to identify somebody like Alexander Hamilton, who may have been something of a contributor to liberty.
Right.
But think of all the other godly leaders like Patrick Henry and Samuel Adams,
right.
and George Washington.
And they're honored because we have Independence Day.
A fair amount of character about them. Thomas Jefferson probably had his dalliances. But the compendium of the great men that established this country had a Christian foundation to them, and were not as compromised as the Alexander Hamiltons, the Aaron Burrs, and
or the Ben Franklins,
of the nation, right?
They still, and that's the point, is that it's the cause of liberty that we're celebrating.
It is, yes.
It's the accomplishments of people who sacrifice their lives, their honor, their families, mm-hmm. everything, and so we honor their sacrifice. Be they, and it's like Veterans Day. Mm-hmm. Okay, we honor veterans. Not all veterans were Christians.
Right.
Not all veterans mm-hmm. had great character. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you wouldn't need Army brigs. You wouldn't need, military police.
Right.
But they fought for the cause of liberty.
And it's safer to honor the bulk of them than it would be to identify one particular person and say, this is the person that we're going to honor above the others.
And what we say is there are attributes like courage and selflessness mm-hmm. that we value, as opposed to cowardice and self-centeredness. There are values that we want to hold up as examples, and so we set aside days that do that mm-hmm. for the encouragement of our children to aspire to be men and women of character. Mm-hmm. And so you're correct. I think it was premature to set aside MLK Day. I don't think it was a wise decision. Mm-hmm. I think it will come back to embarrass us mm-hmm. as more and more is revealed. Now, there are men that you mentioned that have accomplished great things, but we don't honor them as broadly. Like George Washington Carver, one of my heroes. Yeah. George Washington Carver, he said, "I asked the great Creator what the universe was made for," and the response was, "Ask for something more in keeping with that little mind of yours." Mm-hmm. He replied. Mm-hmm. I kind of go, "Ooh." Mm-hmm. He said, "Well, what was man made for?" And the Creator responded, "Little man, you still want to know too much. Cut down the extent of your request and improve the intent." Ooh, that's good advice. Mm-hmm. He said, so I said I wanted to know all about the peanut. So I carried the peanut into my laboratory, and with such knowledge as I had of chemistry and physics, I set to work to take them apart. I separated the water, fats, oils, gums, resins, starches, pentoses, amino acids. I had all the parts of the peanut spread out before me. Carver said, I looked at him, he looked at me, and he said, now you know what the peanut is. But why did you make the peanut, I asked. He said, well, I've given you 3 laws, namely compatibility, temperature, and pressure. So I went on to put these components together, observing these laws, and the result is what you see. Now, what do we see? We see over 300 useful byproducts including milk, butter, flour, coffee, bleach, paper, shaving cream, axle grease, synthetic rubber, all from something that was once considered to be a blight in the South, but because of his character in looking to his Creator, he turned a blight into a blessing. That's character. That's humility. Mm-hmm. That's understanding your place in the universe and your purpose in the universe. Yes, there are men and women who have fought for liberty, but they did not have character. I prefer to honor people like George Washington Carver. I'm reminded of one of your favorite verses. It's in Ecclesiastes, and I'm going to paraphrase, that there was a city besieged, and there was a man, a poor man, who knew what to do and save the city, and nobody remembered his name.
And that's the way it is with, I'm guessing, a fair percentage of people who have contributed something significant to the cause of liberty, to the cause of righteousness in the world.
Yes.
I'd say the vast majority of them, nobody remembered their names.
Nobody remembers.
It's just the way it works.
Their names are written in the Lamb's Book of Life.
That's right. That's correct.
I'd rather not be remembered. We should all aspire to be that poor man whose name is not remembered, but who's remembered by the one who matters. That's what's so important.
The thing about George Washington Carver was his humility.
Mm-hmm.
He was a humble man.
Yep.
He was a man who feared God, and God used him tremendously. I like the fact that I like to contrast sometimes George Washington Carver and Charles Darwin, two scientists.
Yeah.
You know, we get all the uses to the peanut from George Washington Carver.
What do we get from Darwin?
Just a lousy T-shirt.
Exactly.
That's usually what I say. Just
a lousy T-shirt.
Yeah, that's all I get.
Yeah.
You know, he attempted some things in genetics, but turns out Mendel was right. Darwin was wrong. So, oops, missed that one. So, evolution, bad view of genetics, etc. Mendel, who was much more influenced by a Christian worldview, was much more successful in his discovery of how genetics was working versus the Darwinian evolutionary model.
I have a standing reward for any student who can set up a debate between me and a committed evolutionist teacher in a public school, open to the public. We get to videotape. And the debate is based on this topic. Okay, here's the topic, that the model of evolution has provided greater benefit for mankind than has the model of creation.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, who in the world is going to accept that challenge?
And you contrast all the amazing technological and scientific breakthroughs, all of the hard sciences developed by Christians, et cetera, against Charles Darwin, and all I got.
Yeah.
Was this lousy T-shirt?
Yeah,
So
I haven't lost my money.
George Washington Carver is one of my heroes, and here's one of my favorite stories too, because he was actually unpopular. He was unpopular. In November 1924, he was speaking at the Marble Collegiate Church in New York City, and his speech, that was published by the news media, et cetera, and he says to the secular world, God's going to reveal things to us that He never revealed before. If we put our hand in His hand, without God to draw aside the curtain, I would be helpless in my scientific investigations. And so they were very upset with this. The press was appalled by the unscientific language. The New York Times published an article chastising George entitled, "Men of Science Never Talk That Way." Okay, so that's what they said. The writer accused him of demonstrating a complete lack of the scientific spirit. The editorial went on to criticize Christianity, setting up a divide between modern science and faith. Well, George wrote back an article in response to the attack. He told the whole world, "I thoroughly understand that there are scientists to whom the world is merely the result of chemical forces or material electrons. I do not belong to that class." He explained that scientific discovery is a combination of information, divine inspiration, and quoted Galatians 1:12, "For I neither received it of men, neither was I taught of it, but by the revelation of Jesus Christ." So that was his opposition to New York Times. And he's a hero.
Courage.
He's my hero.
That's courage.
I love George Washington Carver. That's courage. Oh, yeah. He stood up, absolutely. There are 100 reasons why I think we ought to be, teaching our children about George Washington Carver. And one of his mentors, which was Booker T. Washington. He worked for Booker T. Washington, down in the college, I think down in Georgia. So Booker T. Washington, good guy. George Washington Carver, tremendous person. And we need to render honor where honor is due.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, David was not a perfect man, but David repented of his sins. David humbled himself before God and cried out to God, "Have mercy upon me, O God, according to your loving kindness and the multitude of your tender mercies, blot out my transgressions." So at the end of the day, we're looking for the fear of God and humility. Those are the things that matter most. And let's honor those guys. Now, they'll probably never get a national holiday to their name.
No.
George Washington Carver is probably not going to get the George Washington Carver Day. But we can honor these guys, and that's one reason why I put together the book American Faith, 27 sketches from Winthrop to Wilkerson, and every tribe and nation, absolutely. George Washington Carver happens to come from African descent, and so does Lemuel Haynes. Lemuel Haynes is one of my favorite stories. He's pastoring churches in the northeastern part of America during the time of deism and Unitarianism coming on like a flood. He's pretty much the only guy standing up and defending the Trinitarian faith in 1796, and he's an African descent American pastor, one of the very first. That is,
and very articulate,
standing up and defending the Orthodox faith in America during the time of the Enlightenment and the destruction of
God
the Christian
raised
faith
him
in the
up to
Northeast.
be the champion.
Yeah, to raise them up, to be the champion.
To be the champion.
Yeah, tremendous.
To defend the faith
Tremendous.
at that time. And we need people like that because we want to advance the cause of liberty. And liberty is only advanced when you have the Spirit of the Lord overseeing and hovering over everything.
Well, friends, talking about the good guys, the bad guys, the good, the bad, the ugly, you'll find them in history. And we need to be very, very careful because what does the Word of God say? We're not going to justify the wicked. We're not going to justify the wicked. And I think what's happening is the whole world is going to see that Martin Luther King Jr. did not have the content of character that he spoke of. And that's a sad commentary on one man. But, it's interesting how the world picks the wrong man. The world tends to pick the wrong man. But as Christians, let's pick the right man based on what? Humility and the fear of God. That's what matters most. All right, friends, I encourage you to American Faith, 27 sketches from Winthrop to Wilkerson, greatest Americans, scientists, politicians, guys who fought for freedom. George Washington's on the list as well. Patrick Henry, one of the very first of American poets, Phyllis Wheatley. She's right there. African-American poet, wrote some great poetry in the 1770s, 1780s. So, man, you've got to be reading these stories of these great Americans, available at generations.org. The book again is American Faith. This is Kevin Swanson and Bill Jack inviting you back again next time as we continue to lay down a vision for the next generation. This has been a production of the Generations Media Network. For more information, go to generations.org/media.